The Leather Boat. Written by Peter Rees. Illustrated by Emmanuel Etienne. Contents. Who was St. Brennan? Page 4. Brendan's Plan. Page 6. Sailing Away. Page 8. Strange Sights. Page 10. The Historian. Page 12. Building a Boat. Page 14. The Voyage. Page 16. Into the Ice. Page 20. Myth or Reality. Page 22. More to Explore. Page 24. Index. Page 24. Who was St. Brennan? St. Brennan was a monk, or a holy man, who lived in Ireland around the 6th century. He is said to have made a legendary sea voyage in a leather boat. No one knows how far Brennan sailed. Some say he got as far as North America. If so, he would have been one of the very first Europeans to go there. Nowadays, Brennan is a patron saint of sailors and others who live on or in the sea, including whales. Setting the scene. Ireland in the early Middle Ages. During the early Middle Ages, from the 400s to 1000, there were very few schools in Ireland. Most people couldn't read or write and knew very little about the rest of the world. No Europeans had ever sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas. Many travelers were very afraid that if they sailed too far, they would never be able to find their way home. Brendan's Plan, about 570 CE. Everybody knew Brennan was a skilled sailor. He had sailed to Scotland, Wales, and even France. There, he had helped other monks build churches and monasteries. Even so, people were surprised when Brennan told him of his latest plan. He wanted to sail a small, open boat across the ocean to try to find a magical land there. Brennan was more than 80 years old. Surely only a fool would attempt such a thing. Brennan had heard stories of a wonderful place across the sea called the Promised Land. He set to work building a special curragh to take him there. Curraghs are traditional Irish boats made from wood with a leather or canvas covering. St. Brennan and his companions built a light vessel with wicker sides and ribs. They covered it with cowhide and smeared all the joints with fat. The Voyage of St. Brennan. Gallerus Oratory is one of the oldest churches in Ireland. It was built around Brennan's time. Sailing Away. Brennan gathered 17 monks to sail the boat. They stocked the boat with food and water and set off from the coast of Ireland at a place called Brennan's Seat. According to legend, the little boat headed west towards the setting sun. The monks must have felt nervous. Ahead of them lay a great Atlantic Ocean with its deep, cold waters and strong winds. What lay beyond, nobody knew. The curragh had a small sail and traveled by wind power. However, when the wind dropped or blew the wrong way, the monks would row using long wooden oars. Legend says that the monks were brought food by people or magical animals they met along the way. At other times, they went to the island of sheep and took what they needed from the huge flocks of sheep there. In this early illustration, the travelers rest on the back of a whale named Jaconius, which they must have mistaken for an island. Strange Sights. According to the story, Brennan and his crew saw many strange things along their voyage. They met hermits, giant fish, and talking birds. They saw a vast pillar of crystal floating in the sea. Once they had burning rocks hurled at them by the inhabitants of an island that was covered in fires. Other times, they were lucky not to be eaten by sea monsters and a fierce giant bird called a griffin. After 7 years and many adventures, they finally came to the land they knew as the Promised Land. When Brennan and his crew reached the Promised Land, they found a great country where the sun never set. The land was covered in fruit and crossed by vast rivers. After spending some time there, Brennan filled his curragh with fruit and precious stones and sailed home to Ireland. The voyage home was the last trip Brennan ever made. According to the legend, he died soon after his return. The Historian, 1973. For hundreds of years, people believed Brennan really had reached the Promised Land. Maps even showed a St. Brennan's Island in the Atlantic Ocean. In recent times, however, people have viewed the voyage as just a legend. But what if some of it were true? Tim Severin decided to find out. Tim is a historian who lives in Ireland. He knew there was only one way to prove that the journey could have been accomplished. He would have to build a leather boat and make the voyage himself. Tim Severin believed the legend of Brennan may actually describe a voyage from Ireland to North America nearly 1,500 years ago. He was sure that some of the strange stories could be explained by things in nature. Above, Brennan is said to have begun his journey at the rugged Dingle Peninsula on Ireland's west coast. Left, many early maps showed an imagery Brennan's Island. Building a boat. Tim wanted to make his curragh in an old way so that it would be just like Brennan's. His first job was to find the same kinds of wood and leather but that Brennan would have used. Then, skilled boat builders made a wooden frame for the boat. With the help of craftspeople, Tim carefully stitched together the pieces of leather that made up the hull of the boat. Finally, he protected the leather by painting it with animal grease. It smelled bad. The finished boat was 11 meters long. Its frame was made from an Irish ash wood and covered the 49 specially prepared ox hides. It would carry containers of food and water, as well as cameras and a battery-powered two-way radio. When all the supplies, clothes, and equipment were stowed, there would be just enough room for a crew of 5. How cramped it must have been for Brennan and his 17 monks. The wooden frame of the curragh as it looked before being covered with leather. The Voyage, 1976. Tim named his boat the Brennan. He found 4 crew members to help him sail on the long journey. On May 17, 1976, a large crowd gathered at Brandon Creek on the Dingle Peninsula to send them off. Some people shook their heads. "It will never float," they said. Life on board the Brennan wasn't easy. The crew ate dried foods or fish and birds they had caught at sea. Often, waves would slosh over the sides and drench them as they slept. They quickly learned to tolerate each other's different ways and work together as a team. Tim had decided that the best route to North America was across the North Atlantic. Just like Brennan centuries before, Tim and his crew would be alone in the middle of the ocean. After a month, Brendan arrived in the Faroe Falls. Some people think the Faroe Falls may be the island of sheep that Brennan visited on his voyage. In the island, they found many flocks of sheep, all pure white, so numerous as to hide the face of the land. The Voyage of St. Brendan. The Brennan received a warm welcome in the Faroe Islands and even picked up a new crew member. Far out in the ocean, whales and dolphins came to have a close look at the Brennan. Once, a pod of about 140 pilot whales surrounded the boat. Another time, a curious orca got so close that Tim and the crew could smell the air from its blowhole. Tim was reminded of the fish of enormous size sprouting foam from its nostrils that had attacked Brennan on the boat. Perhaps it had been an orca. In July, the Brennan reached Iceland. The first part of the journey was over. Iceland is a land of volcanoes. In the voyage of St. Brennan, the monks pass by an island whose inhabitants hurl burning rocks at them. Another island spouts smoke and flames. Had Brennan visited Iceland and seen a volcanic eruption? The whole island seemed to be one globe of fire, and the sea on every side boiled up and foamed like a pot set on a fire. The Voyage of Brennan. In 1973, a volcano threatened to destroy a town on one of Iceland's Vestmanna Islands. Into the Ice. 1977. The Brennan sailed across the cold North Atlantic. The wind was freezing and sharp chunks of ice covered the sea all around. One chunk pushed a hole in the side of the boat, which the crew had to quickly repair. Sometimes they passed enormous icebergs, more than 30 meters high. Tim thought of the giant crystal pillar that Brennan saw floating in the sea, surrounded by a silvery net. It must have been an iceberg, just like these. The silvery net was probably a jumble of broken pack ice around it. On June 24, 1977, the Brennan landed on a small island off Newfoundland in Canada. All the hard work and perseverance had paid off. Altogether, Tim and his crew had been at sea for 118 days, with a break for the winter. Battered by storms and chilled by icy water, they had traveled almost 5,000 kilometers. Tim and the crew of the Brennan approached Peckford Island off Newfoundland. Myth or reality? We may never know whether St. Brennan really sailed to North America in a leather boat. However, Tim's voyage showed us that it was possible, using the tools and materials available in Brennan's time. In places along the route, Tim heard stories that told of visits by Irish monks. In ancient times, the monks had sailed from Ireland in search of peace and quiet. They settled on islands and lived lonely lives as hermits. Some may even have reached Iceland. Even if Brennan himself never went to America, his legend may contain experiences of some of those brave, forgotten soldiers. The real Brennan. Brennan lived so long ago that legends about him have been mixed up with the truth. It is difficult for us to know what to believe. What we know about Brennan. Where he was born and where he died. Who his teachers were. Some of the places he visited. Many of the monasteries and churches he founded. What we don't know about Brennan. The exact dates of his birth and death. What he looked like. When and why he was made a saint. Whether he actually sailed across the ocean to the Promised Land.